Hey guys, tonight we begin with the elegant, disciplined, and often brutally unforgiving world of feudal Japan, a place of samurai honor, strict codes, and very sharp consequences. It's the land of cherry blossoms, beautiful poetry, and a daily routine that would absolutely break most of us by lunchtime. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In feudal Japan, you don't wake up and choose your path. You wake up and it's already been chosen. By birth, by blood, and by people who've been dead for 6 generations. Which sounds lovely, until you experience it in winter. Sounds noble, right? Fancy swords, silk robes, poetic sword fights under cherry blossoms. Now let's talk about the fine print. Being a samurai in feudal Japan, I sent about swinging a katana and shouting for honor. It is about never, ever making a mistake. The entire framework of your life is governed by Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code of conduct so strict, even your ancestors are nervous. You don't live for yourself. You live for your daimyo, your lord. His word is law. His moods are the weather. Your job is to serve him with such loyalty that you'd rather die horribly than disappoint him mildly. No pressure. Disobedience? Dishonor. Failure? Dishonor. Raising your voice inappropriately? Dishonor. Looking sideways during a tea ceremony? Dishonor again. And dishonor isn't something you sleep off. It's something you atone for, usually with your own intestines. That's not metaphor. That's seppuku, ritual suicide expected of disgraced samurai. You kneel, pull out a short blade, and, well, let's stop there. You get the idea. This wasn't rare. It was respected, celebrated even, a final way to preserve dignity. Mess up badly enough, and your lord might quietly give you a short blade and a quiet room and say, you know what to do. And on top of all that, samurai were expected to train constantly. Swordsmanship, archery, horseback riding, strategy, calligraphy, poetry, all while maintaining perfect posture and the expression of a man who has never known joy, only obligation. Laughing too loud? Unrefined. Showing fear? Weakness. Getting emotional? Shameful. Your clothes are precise. Your sword spotless. Your conduct so honorable, it makes everyone around you feel inferior. And if you ever raise your sword in anger without cause, insult a superior, or lose a duel, you don't just lose. You lose everything. Being a samurai isn't about glory. It's about silence, discipline, and surviving each day without blinking at the wrong time. So yes, you look great in armor, but you're one eyebrow twitch away from existential catastrophe. You begin your day by washing, not in a cozy tiled bathroom with a warm towel and cucumber-scented soap, but at a stone basin filled with ice-cold water, fetched from a well or stream. There's no heating, no negotiating. You splash your face and arms, while your breath floats in clouds, shivering as if the ancestors are punishing you for having pores. Soap? Only if you're wealthy. And even then, it is made from ash or rice bran and smells like something a monk invented to test your soul. In rural areas, the local bathhouse, if you're lucky enough to have one, becomes the heart of hygiene. The communal center is heated by firewood, filled with villagers, and by communal, we mean absolutely no privacy whatsoever. You bathe next to your neighbors, your boss, your future in-laws, and maybe even your landlord, completely naked, in silence. Pretending this isn't awkward, you scrub first, then soak. Cleanliness is sacred. Dirtying the bathwater? Social suicide. But if you're far from a bathhouse, you wash what you can, when you can. You clean your teeth with salt or a twig. Your nails are kept neat. Your clothes are regularly haired. You do this not because it's fashionable, but because being unclean is seen as shameful, both spiritually and socially. And if you're a samurai, multiply the pressure. Your lord might inspect you, head to toe, at any time. Dirty fingernails? Dishonor. A wrinkled robe? Disrespect. Too much body odor during a bow? You might not get back up again. Women were expected to smell like cherry blossoms in composure. Bathing became a daily ritual. Skincare was practiced with military precision. Hair was styled in elaborate shapes that took hours to complete, all so you could work a rice mortar and still look dignified doing it. So yes, feudal Japan was clean. Very clean. But it came at a cost: freezing water, endless grooming, and the constant, soul-shrinking awareness that someone was definitely judging your foot hygiene. Your role in society isn't a suggestion. It's a life sentence. Were you born into a samurai family? Lucky you. You're now responsible for the blade, the bow, and 10,000 ways to sit properly in front of your lord. Born a peasant? Congratulations. You'll be spending the next 40 years ankle-deep in mud, and your children will too, forever. There is no resume. There is no start your own business. You're either a samurai, peasant, artisan, or merchant. And once you're placed, you stay there. Trying to jump ranks isn't just frowned upon. It's punishable. You don't climb the ladder in feudal Japan. You bow to it. And we haven't even gotten to the Ada, the untouchables. These are the people who deal with death. Butchers, executioners, leather workers. Society needs them, but pretends they don't exist. They're like ghosts with jobs, important jobs, but ghosts all the same. Even within classes, it gets more complex. Let's say you're a merchant. Sounds decent, right? You've got coin. But in feudal Japan, you're near the bottom. Why? Because you make money without labor, and that's seen as morally questionable. You're literally too efficient to be respected. Meanwhile, the peasants are taxed so heavily on their rice that if they cough up too much, they starve. If they hide some to survive, that's treason. Heads roll. Often, samurai? You've got honor, yes, but you're living in constant fear of disrespecting your lord, your ancestors, your tailor, or your sword by accidentally sneezing at the wrong time. Women? You didn't even ask. But no, you're not getting out of this either. Whatever your class is, your freedom ends where your father's opinion begins. You'll marry who you're told, obey whom you must, and thank the heavens if you're allowed to learn poetry. So yes, you're born, assigned a costume and a script, and shoved onto the stage of society, whether you want to perform or not. It's elegant, poetic, and crushingly inescapable. And that's all before you've had breakfast. You might think feudal life was all grit and grime, but Japan took cleanliness seriously, painfully seriously. In fact, it was practically a religion. Let's say you're born into the warrior class, the samurai. So you weren't born a samurai. No sword, no poetry, no chance of dramatic ritual disembowelment. That's the good news. The bad news? You're a peasant, which means your entire existence is a combination of dirt, sweat, back pain, and government-mandated rice delivery. But in feudal Japan, meals aren't about indulgence. They're about survival, simplicity, and not choking on a fishbone in front of your in-laws. If you're a peasant, your diet is rice. Rice for breakfast, rice for lunch, rice for dinner. If you're lucky, it's actual rice. If you're not, it's barley pretending to be rice. Maybe you get a turnip, maybe some pickled radish, if the gods are feeling generous. Meat? That's for the daimyo, or for the one chicken that looked at you funny and mysteriously vanished. Fish, sometimes, but it's dried, salted, and sharp enough to file your teeth. Soup? Usually miso, if you can call hot salted water with 2 floating leaf soup. Flavorful, yes, in the same way seawater is hydrating. Now, if you're a samurai, you do get better food, but you eat last. After your lord, his guests, and whoever else he's decided to impress. That means cold rice, cold soup, and the deep spiritual exercise of watching others eat while pretending you're honored to wait. Everything is seasonal, not because it's trendy, but because there's no refrigeration, no global supply chain, and if you don't harvest it, it doesn't exist. Winter is just nature's way of suggesting fasting. And heaven forbid you get food poisoning. Medical care is ... optimistic. The local cure is usually lie down and think about your ancestors. You'll either get better or join them. Steal food? That's serious. Touch the daimyo steichen, and you'll learn what the phrase, public example, really means. Tea exists, but not the cozy kind. The tea ceremony is a performance of etiquette and existential humility, not refreshment. So yes, meals are sacred, quiet, and respectful. But mostly, they're small, bland, and always contain at least one crunchy mystery item. And no, you can't complain. Not unless you want your next meal served through your nose. You wake up with the sun, not because you're in tune with nature, but because the land tax won't pay itself. Maybe your neighbor insists his cow can predict the weather. And for one reckless, foolish moment, you think about correcting them. Don't. In feudal Japan, your opinion is a liability. Free speech is not a concept. It's a fast track to disgrace, exile, or sudden career-ending decapitation. The social hierarchy is rigid, and every word has weight. Speak above your class, you're being impudent. Criticize someone above you, you're insolent. Make a joke that doesn't land, that's treason adjacent. Even within families, you tread carefully. A son doesn't interrupt his father. A wife doesn't correct her husband. And no one, absolutely no one, questions the daimyo unless they've always wanted to explore the afterlife via sword tip. Samurai are trained to speak with measured calm, even when furious. A sharp tongue is worse than a dull blade. It's unbecoming, it's dangerous, and it might force someone into the awkward position of having to kill you just to restore their honor. Which brings us to apologies. In feudal Japan, apologies are an art form. You don't just say sorry. You bow. You grovel. You possibly write a poem about your shame. You might even send a gift, like a live bird or a decorative comb, while sincerely hoping the person receiving it doesn't decide to duel you anyway. And gods help you if your tone is too casual. A misplaced word can be interpreted as sarcasm, defiance, or... And also, your thatched hut has no doors, no windows, and someone's goat just walked across your bed mat. Breakfast? If you're lucky, a bowl of rice porridge and a side of last week's pickled something. If you're not, it's pretend you're not hungry with a splash of river water. Then it's off to the rice fields, which sound peaceful in documentaries, but in reality, are mud pits designed to break your spirit over 12 exhausting hours. You plant, you weed, you hope there's no bandit raid today. And when the sun goes down, you limp home, only to find one of your oxen is missing, and the village headman would like a word about your grain shortfall. Taxes are relentless. You don't get paid in coins, you pay with rice. Your family eats what's left, which isn't much, especially if the harvest was bad, or if your lord's nephew rode a horse through your field during a military drill. Want to complain? That's adorable. You can't. Talking back gets you whipped, exiled, or promoted to corpse. If you're lucky, you might become a village elder, which means people still don't listen to you. But now they ask for your advice first. And you're legally not allowed to leave your village without permission. You are, in effect, a rice-based prisoner with seasonal ankle rot. There are festivals, sometimes, You drink sweet sake, dance in a circle, and try not to think about how planting season starts again in 4 days. So yes, you are the foundation of the economy, the reason the samurai eat, and the person everyone forgets exists. And no, you do not get a day off, because feudal Japan believes in hard work, generational suffering, and keeping expectations extremely, extremely low. You're hungry. Of course you are. You've been tilling, planting, sweating, and politely not dying since sunrise. Time to eat. So you've just finished your modest bowl of crunchy, maybe fish soup. Someone says something absurd. Maybe your lord mumbles a bad haiku. Maybe your village elder misquotes a proverb. Spiritual rot. Silence is almost always safer. Even humor becomes a tightrope walk, narrow and unforgiving. Laughing at the wrong thing could be seen as disrespect, and laughing with someone important might imply you think you're on their level. And that is how people end up, mysteriously reassigned to the far cold reaches of the north. No. In feudal Japan, love is a side quest, and one you're unlikely to complete. Marriage isn't built on feelings. It's built on alliances, land, taxes, and not offending your ancestors. If you're a peasant, your parents, or perhaps the village elder, arrange your marriage. Romantic compatibility is irrelevant. Strong legs and healthy teeth carry more weight. If you're samurai, marriage is an even colder transaction. It's a political tool, a way to cement alliances, settle disputes, or pay off a lingering family grudge, perhaps with a decorative kimono. The goal is enjoy. It's stability. Ideally, one that doesn't unravel before harvest. Love letters? Maybe, but only if they're rewritten in perfect seasonal metaphors and passed discreetly by a maid who knows far too much. Women, of course, have even less say. A samurai daughter might be married off at 15. She must master calligraphy, needlework, etiquette, and the complex art of never voicing disappointment. Her role is to bear sons, serve tea, and absolutely never fall in love with the flute teacher. Real romantic love, the fluttering heart, the whispered vows exists, but mostly in poetry, theater, and tragic ghost stories. If you want to feel love in feudal Japan, you'll need to watch a no-drama about two souls doomed to drift forever as mist. Stepping outside your assigned role in love comes at a price: exile, disgrace, or a very final sword stroke. The punishment may come from your spouse, your lord, or your in-laws, whichever arrives first. Even samurai who take concubines aren't free from emotional disaster. It simply means there are more people to disappoint, silently. So yes, people fell in love, quietly, painfully, with the wrong person, and always at the worst possible time. Because in feudal Japan, love wasn't forbidden. It was just dangerously inconvenient. So yes, you're technically free to speak, but in practice, you nod, smile, and pray your opinions never try to escape your mouth. Because in feudal Japan, loose lips don't just sink ships, they sink reputations, social standing, and sometimes entire bloodlines. In feudal Japan, fashion isn't about self-expression. It's about clarity, making sure everyone knows exactly how far below them you are, just by glancing at your sleeves. Your clothing doesn't reflect your personality. It reflects your position, your function, and whether or not you are legally allowed to carry a sword without getting stopped by a curious samurai. At the top, samurai wear layers of silk robes, sometimes armored, always carefully arranged. Their outfits signal dignity, strength, and readiness. Deep blues, earthy browns, and the occasional blood-red accent. Colors that whisper of elegance and warn that the wearer has almost certainly killed before, and would again, for less than a fashion offense. And of course, the swords, the daishu, are more than weapons. They are badges of status. Drawing one in public is a last resort. Wearing them improperly is the first step toward a very sharp correction. Peasants, by contrast, wear cotton, and humility. Brown, gray, and beige dominate, not because of minimalism, but because dyed fabrics cost more than survival allows. Their clothing says, "Yes, I work in mud. No, I didn't choose this life. Yes, these are my only sandals." Merchants can afford finer material, but they're still lower on the social scale than peasants or samurai. So they stay muted. Silk, yes, but subtle. Wealthy merchant families master the art of looking just respectable, enough not to attract attention from a bored samurai on patrol. Artisans and craftsmen dress modestly, practical, durable, and most of all, quiet. Drawing attention to oneself is considered a social flaw. And then there are women who must navigate a complex system of seasonal colors, layered symbolism, and hairstyles that could double as architectural structures. Wearing the wrong shade at the wrong time eyes into just a faux pas. It has household-level dishonor and may spark days of whispered gossip. So in this world, clothing isn't about style. It's about social survival and avoiding divine or maternal disapproval. So you're imagining moonlit walks beneath cherry blossoms, whispered poetry under paper lanterns, maybe even a dramatic kiss between a wandering samurai and a forbidden princess. Interest in painting? Excellent. You'll be decorating the temple your family sponsors, not with freedom or flair, but within strict inherited guidelines. And in silence, of course. Silence that echoes through your brushstrokes, broken only by the sound of your breath and the weight of your ancestors watching. Fields dry into cracked mosaics, and farmers squint at the heavens like spurned lovers. You may think you matter. You don't. He blesses festivals, names eras, and writes poems with impressive brushwork. Spoiler: if you're at the bottom, education is a rumor wrapped in hope. At the top, samurai children receive the full experience. From the moment they can walk, they're trained in reading, writing, archery, horseback riding, poetry, and the fine art of remaining stoic while composing a death poem at 14. Their education is intense, focused, and purposeful. They study Chinese philosophy, Bushido, and how to bow so perfectly it could bring a tear to a god's eye. Artisan and merchant children receive more modest schooling, mathematics, bookkeeping, maybe a bit of reading. Nothing extravagant, just enough to track inventory and not insult clients. You won't read Confucius. You'll learn how to price turnips by the dozen. Useful, not poetic, but he holds no real power. He's a ceremonial flame, flickering, lovely, and mostly kept in a box. This hierarchy is not a ladder. You do not climb it, you are placed. Carefully pruned like a bonsai tree, and told to grow only where allowed. Ambition is dangerous. It invites suspicion. Respect flows upward. Authority drops downward. Orders aren't debated. They're followed. Disagreements are not spirited discussions. They are career-ending errors. And if you ever start thinking you might be above your station, that's not a dream. That's a warning sign. You will be corrected with formality, precision, and possibly a katana. So wherever you find yourself, merchant, artisan, samurai, or lord, someone above controls your destiny, and someone below is hoping you slip. There is always someone above you, and they likely don't know your name. If you're a peasant, your life belongs to the village headman. The headman serves the local samurai, who answers to a daimyo, who bends to the shogun, who may or may not receive mysterious poems from the emperor, a man more myth than monarch. Even the samurai, grim-faced, sword-wielding, honor-bound, are not free. They take orders. They fight battles they didn't to start over land they don't own for rewards they'll never personally enjoy. In theory, they're noble. In practice, they are glorified middle managers with more calligraphy lessons than autonomy. The daimyo, lords of vast provinces, might seem invincible. But if they get too bold, too ambitious, the shogun steps in. Inspections begin. Letters go missing. Heads may roll, gently, elegantly, but they still roll. And even the shogun, the top of the military pyramid, sleeps with one eye open. Cousins whisper, advisors smile too long, and someone is always reaching for the teapot with just a little too much interest. You pray, you chant, you bargain with your neighbors well. And then there's winter, not a crisp, snowy fairy tale, but bone-deep cold. Firewood is scarce, blankets thin. You gather with others around a single brazier, trying not to notice that your toes have stopped participating. And sometimes, for dramatic flair, volcanoes erupt. Ash falls like snow, lava moves slowly, but with purpose. And everything you thought was sacred may suddenly be a glowing rock garden. There is no emergency fund, no relief convoy. You rebuild what collapses, bury what's lost, and carry on, because disaster is not an excuse here. It's part of the curriculum. Nature in feudal Japan doesn't serve as background scenery. It is the stage, the script, and sometimes the final act. And don't even think about scandal, not so much as a whisper of impropriety. One poorly timed affair, a drunken misstep, or a poem that drips with too much sarcasm, and shame spreads like ink on silk. Your siblings will be shunned, your mother mortified. Your great-uncle, perhaps already tired of the drama, might feel compelled to disembowel himself just to reset the family's karma. Because here, you're not an individual. You're a representative, a carefully groomed chess piece, a walking liability with a surname. But if you play your part, bow at the right time, speak only when expected, marry who you're told, then maybe, just maybe, your name will be spoken by your clan with a tone that resembles something close to pride. And in feudal Japan, that's the emotional equivalent of a personal achievement badge. Let's say somehow you've made it this far, survived the rigid hierarchy, the sword duels, the unspoken rules, and the rice tax. Congratulations. Now try surviving the weather. Feudal Japan is nature's finest painting and its cruelest prank. Snow-capped peaks, whispering bamboo groves, moonlit cherry blossoms, all hiding the constant threat of environmental upheaval. The scenery may calm your soul, but the climate wants you gone. Begin with typhoons, vast, roaring tempests that descend like furious gods. They flatten villages, scatter rooftops, and turn carefully tended rice paddies into floating regret. Earthquakes follow, abrupt, violent, and utterly without warning. You might be boiling tea one moment and crawling through rubble the next. There are no alerts, just a low growl from the earth, and the realization that your house is now slightly more diagonal than before. Survive that, and fire still waits. Everything burns, homes, memories, hopes, all built from wood, because of course they are. And when the rains come, they bring flooding, sweeping away fields, homes, and the illusion of control. Crops vanish, livestock wander. The tax collector, however, never fails to arrive, only now with penalties. Then the droughts. The sun stretches unchallenged across cloudless skies. In feudal Japan, power flows in one direction, downhill. So do responsibilities. And blame. You may think you're important. The emperor, meanwhile, outranks them all, in theory. What you learn in feudal Japan, and whether you're allowed to learn anything at all, depends entirely on your status. And then there are peasant children. Their education starts with a hoe and ends with a backache. Lessons are passed down in the field. This is rice, this is dirt, now start working. Every corner of life, from the curve of a fan to the exact placement of teacups, appears designed to elevate the soul. But it is beauty with rules. Culture here isn't just artistic. It's regulated. The way you fold your kimono, arrange flowers, pour tea, it all follows centuries of expectations. Deviate, and you don't just look odd. You commit aesthetic heresy. Take the tea ceremony. Peaceful from afar. In reality, It is a minefield of posture, silence, and timing. Guests must sit in a specific way, turn their cups just so, and sip with reverence. Not too eagerly, not too slowly. Each movement, a quiet performance judged by hosts, ancestors, and possibly the gods. Get it wrong, and the shame echoes through your family tree. There are no classrooms, no scrolls, no chalkboards. The only writing they encounter might be the latest tax notice nailed to a post, always bad news. Literacy is rare. Curiosity is a luxury. And for girls, unless you're high-born, education means learning to sew, bow, clean, and remain quietly invisible. If you're very lucky, someone may teach you calligraphy or a seasonal poem or two, but only if it doesn't interfere with folding laundry with ceremonial precision. Learning for fun? That's a dangerous concept, one that could make elders choke on their tea. In feudal Japan, education isn't about self-improvement. It's about preparing you to serve quietly, without complaint. Feudal Japan is visually breathtaking. Calligraphy? Also dangerous. A brushstroke is not just ink. It's your soul's alignment, your discipline captured in black and white. Sloppy penmanship isn't just unattractive. It's suspicious. It implies inner chaos. Poetry? It can be art, or it can be a scandal. One too many metaphors, or a misplaced seasonal reference, and suddenly people whisper that your spirit is off balance, or worse, you're impertinent. In feudal Japan, even culture is a test you don't remember signing up for. You don't just write a haiku, you write it in the proper season, on the correct type of paper, using metaphor that references both nature and your emotional landscape without getting too personal, too passionate. You lack refinement, too dry. You re-spiritually cold, too. Clever, you re-showing off. And now no one is inviting you to the moon-viewing party culture. Here is a delicate game. You participate not to relax, but to prove that you are composed, refined, and deeply deathly afraid of appearing uncultured beauty and feudal. Japan isn't effortless, it is a battlefield in silk robes. Not because you lack strength or resolve, not because you're soft or fragile, but because this was never a world designed for individual survival. It was a system carved with precision, upheld by silence, and maintained through 1,000 daily performances. Submission was not just expected, it was refined into an art form. Always. Feudal Japan was beautiful. Yes, breathtaking in fact. You might step over a threshold with your left foot instead of your right. You might forget to bow, or bow too deeply, or ask a question when silence was demanded. And that, just that, would be enough to brand you a threat to the entire social fabric. When Xerxes the Great set his sights on Greece around 480 BCE, Artemisia did something no other woman dared. She didn't stay behind. She was whispered about before battle even began. Yet Artemisia didn't flinch. She entered that war not as an ornament, but as a force. She stood in war councils where generals outnumbered her, and still her voice cut through. But even in Greece, her legend grew. Herodotus, the father of history, and a native of Halicarnassus himself, recorded her story with a curious mix of reverence and unease. But more than anything, she understood the ultimate truth of war. Identity bends, power remains. And in a world ruled by men, she did not ask to join the game. She played it better than most. Some called her Medusa with a sword. Others thought her a genius, perhaps too clever for the age she lived in. Designed for submission, precision, and quiet, relentless obedience, every moment was a test of posture, of loyalty, of whether or not you bowed at precisely the correct depth while reciting a seasonal greeting in the right emotional tone. If you failed, there were consequences. Public shame at best, ritual death at worst. There were no days off. No just being yourself. You were born into a role, handed a script, and expected to perform it with deadly elegance for the rest of your life. Deviating wasn't seen as brave, it was seen as dangerous. The individual didn't matter, the clan did, the lord did, the land did. If you were a samurai, You carried the weight of centuries of honor and the very real threat of having to recite poetry before slicing open your own abdomen. If you were a peasant, you worked the land from dawn until your spine became a question mark, hoping the weather didn't betray you or your lord didn't. If you were a woman, your life was a carefully managed exercise. Embrace silence and sacrifice. And if you were anyone else, well, the system was designed to make sure you stayed exactly where you were feudal. Japan was beautiful, yes, breathtakingly. So the architecture, the rituals, the poetry, the art, all meticulously curated. But that beauty came with sharp edges. It required discipline, so tight it could snap bones. It demanded respect so absolute, it swallowed individuality whole. So no, you wouldn't last. You speak out of turn, or laugh too loudly, or accidentally step over a threshold with your left foot instead of your right. You forget. To bow, you ask a question. You want to change something, and that alone would mark you as a threat to the order. But that's the brilliance and the tragedy and of feudal Japan. It wasn't made to be easy, it was made to endure. Honest, precise, brutally tactical. She didn't flatter the emperor. She warned him. When others promised glory, she cautioned restraint. Before the fateful Battle of Salamis, she advised against naval engagement in narrow straits, warning that the geography would favor the Greeks. But Xerxes, flattered and confident, ignored her. She brought ships, 5 of them, sleek, fast, lethal, and she didn't send a proxy to command them. And in that sea of splinters and shouting, Artemisia remained composed, commanding her flagship through wreckage and smoke. As Greek ships closed in, she made a decision still debated by historians. With no path to flee, she ordered her ship to ram and sink another Persian ally's vessel. It was bold, ruthless, unthinkable, but it worked. Her enemies believed she had defected. The Greeks broke off pursuit, and Xerxes, watching from a distant cliff, reportedly marveled at her cunning. She climbed aboard and took the helm herself. Xerxes, emperor of one of history's largest empires, did not just permit her presence, he respected it, listened, trusted. In a world where women were sidelined, Artemisia moved forward, not behind. Her loyalty wasn't to the Greeks, despite her lineage. It was to power, and she played its game with an artistry few could rival, because that was the brilliance and the quiet tragedy of feudal Japan. It was not built to be questioned. It was built to endure. The architecture, the rituals, the poetry and painted screens, all constructed with a precision that dazzled the senses and impressed the ancestors. But that beauty came with edges, sharp ones. It was a beauty that demanded perfection and punished deviation. It required discipline so taut could snap the will, and it revered a kind of respect so total it left no space for the self to breathe. Every step you took, every breath you exhaled, was measured by the ever-watchful eye of your community. Even stillness could be interpreted and misinterpreted. And if your cabana arrangement doesn't follow the rules, well, may the gods have mercy on your bonsai. In an age when women were rarely allowed to speak in public, let alone command troops, Artemisia of Caria existed like a historical contradiction, a glitch in the matrix of ancient custom. A woman, yes, but also a warrior, a tactician, a sovereign, someone who by all accounts should not have existed. And yet, there she was, wearing the twin responsibilities of queen and naval commander like armor. After all, we've seen the hierarchy, the hygiene, the honor, and the endless rice rituals. Let's be honest, you wouldn't last a day in feudal Japan. A mosaic of loyalties and rivalries. It was often caught in the gravitational pull of empires. Artemisia didn't merely inherit power, she transformed it. Born of Greek blood, loyal to Persia, a woman navigating a man's world, her identity was a complicated braid of expectation and defiance. Upon the death of her husband, instead of retreating to quiet widowhood or yielding her title to a male heir, she seized the reins of authority. It was a quiet act of rebellion, one that whispered louder than a battlefield. Every moment was a test of posture, loyalty, and presence, whether or not you bowed at precisely the correct depth, while reciting a seasonal greeting in the right emotional tone. If you faltered even slightly, there were consequences. Public shame at best, ritual death at worst. There were no allowances for personality, no freedom to simply exist as yourself. You were born into a role, handed a script, and expected to perform it with elegance, with poise, and with unwavering devotion until your last breath. To deviate wasn't an act of bravery, it was a threat to the order, and the individual simply did not matter. The clan did. The Lord did. The land always did. If you were a samurai, you carried the heavy legacy of centuries of inherited honor, and the very real threat that one day you might have to write your own death poem before ceremonially opening your own body. If you were a peasant, you greeted the rising sun already bowed by labor, tending rice paddies and fearing the whims of nature or your lord, your spine bending slowly, day after day, into a question mark. And if you were a woman, your life was a finely tuned performance, one of grace, composure, and continuous sacrifice. You bowed in silence. You walked in silence. You endured in silence. And if you were anyone else, merchant, monk, or miscellaneous, the system ensured you knew your place. No, you wouldn't last. You might speak too casually or laugh too loudly. But across the seas, in an entirely different world and era, another kind of order reigned, one also built on power, but with different tools. She ruled Halicarnassus, a coastal city in what is now southwestern Turkey, but back then it was a strategic node in the vast Persian Empire. But ruling wasn't enough. She wanted to lead. Of course, her decision was controversial. To the Greeks, she was a traitor, a queen who had sold her heritage to serve a foreign king. When the battle began, it was chaos. Persian ships collided. Greek triremes, swift and familiar with the straits, weaved through the carnage like sharks. Among Persian allies, her actions stirred resentment. Some were infuriated that a woman had taken such liberties, had led ships with competence, spoken without deference, and survived when others fell. Artemisia was strategist, monarch, rebel, and enigma. You would outlast a day in feudal Japan, not because you were weak, not because you were soft, but because this was a society designed for survival. It was won. The Greeks, assuming she must be on their side, stopped chasing her. She slipped away untouched. Xerxes, watching from a hilltop, supposedly witnessed this, and turned to his aides exclaiming, "My men have become women, and my women have become men." It was perhaps the highest praise he ever gave a subordinate, especially one who had just sacrificed a friendly ship to save herself. Artemisia was saving lives, and that brutal brilliance earned her a rare reward, while many Persian commanders perished or faded into obscurity. She returned not diminished, but elevated her name. Spoken with a mix of awe and caution, the Persian fleet staggered home from Salamis, no longer invincible, their image shattered, and their spirits low. But Artemisia stood, apart not because she had tasted defeat, but because she had transcended it. But Artemisia's move wasn't just about survival. It was strategy, misdirection, and cold-blooded calculation wrapped into one. She read the battlefield in real time and made a split-second decision that saved her ship, her crew, and possibly her own life had been taken to demand. More would be to invite collapse, and somehow Xerxes listened. This was no longer a man drunk on power, but responsibility. She was entrusted with the guardianship of Xerxes' sons, a gesture steeped in honor and risk in ancient courts. This meant more than affection. It meant belief that her loyalty and wisdom could guide the next generation. That kind of faith was not easily given, and even less often to women, yet she was chosen without question, without rival. But her ruler, leaning into wisdom she had earned, his trust not through charm or tradition, but through outcome and the seal. Proof of her foresight was undeniable when others failed to sway. Him she succeeded not because she was louder, but because she was right. What she did next wasn't only a tactical flourish, but a masterclass in leadership under fire, in a moment when others hesitated or fell to chaos. Artemisia found clarity in the noise and confusion, and from that clarity came precision. What set her apart wasn't luck, it was vision, a calm, analytical mind amid the panic that followed this act gave her a strange kind of prestige, even as her enemies puzzled over her allegiance. The clarity of her purpose was undeniable. She was there not to earn favor or glory, but to ensure survival, to outlast. With caution now she governed with legacy. People looked to her not with obligation, but with recognition. Her story passed not through banners or temples, but through words, through the mouths of those who could not deny her even when they tried in the stillness of scrolls. And under the weight of oral memory, Artemisia took root, not just in her own time, but in every time that came after. Where others fell, and in doing so, she etched herself into the memory of a crumbling campaign. It was oddly a beginning, a moment that catapulted her. From commander to confidant Xerxes, who had once assembled a kingdom's worth of voices for advice, now turned to the one who had read the battlefield and made the right call back on land in the hush of strategy rooms and the long silence after battle. It was Artemisia who stood at his side not for display, but for counsel. When he asked her what next, what path might still carry pride from ruin, she did not flatter, she spoke hard truth. It was controversial, yes, and many whispered about her ruthlessness, but these whispers only added to her myth. When others were trying to save face for most, this battle was a turning point toward ruin. For her retreat, she told him, and leave the rest to Mardonius, not as surrender, but as preservation. Athens had already burned the symbolic prize. This single moment captured the rarest kind of power, the ability to alter the course of an empire, not with force, but thought. Her reward was not mere praise. She returned to Halicarnassus no longer just a sovereign, but something greater, the embodiment of proven wisdom, where once she may have ruled. Herodotus, born of the very city she ruled, wove her tale not as a romantic ideal or a villain to be feared, but as a paradox he could not ignore. She was both insider and outsider, both ferocious and restrained, and in his writing she became more than a queen. She became a puzzle, something that lingered in thought long after the telling. Her actions at Salamis were not merely bold, they were chilling in their effectiveness. She had no need for theatrics. Her strength was calculation, and that made her unforgettable. The historians who followed tried to place her in neat categories, but she eluded them all, too calculating to be mere ornament, too pragmatic to be dismissed. Her defiance was not loud, it was precise, and that unsettled even her admirers. She had broken no laws, declared no manifestos. Ground the quiet space where history and ambiguity touch, and in that ambiguity she became more powerful than certainty ever could, for she represented what few dared to imagine: a woman who could command fleets, whisper truth to emperors, and leave behind a legacy not built on gold, but on respect. To her story, a steady pulse that speaks of resilience, foresight, and quiet rebellion. Her legend remains not as noise, but as a whisper that refuses to fade, yet in every decision she undermined. A world built by men for men, her silence was never weakness, it was weaponry, and in the hands of a woman like her, silence could reshape dynasties. S story has always lived in the in-between, between empires, between genders, between legend and history. And nowhere is this more obvious than in the way her legacy has been argued, bent, and reinterpreted over the centuries. Was she a Persian puppet, a Greek traitor, or simply a sovereign playing chess while others were busy swinging swords? To Persians, she was a loyal commander, one of the few who gave sound advice and fought with distinction. Xerxes clearly trusted her more than many of his seasoned generals. That in itself speaks volumes about her political sharpness and composure under pressure. In the Persian world, her loyalty was seen as honorable, perhaps even heroic. To the Greeks, it was more complicated. Many viewed her as a turncoat, someone who had betrayed her Hellenic roots to side with an Eastern desperate. And yet even Greek chroniclers, notably Herodotus, couldn't help but admire her intelligence and cunning. She was in many ways a mirror to their own contradictions, proving that not all Greeks stood with Greece, and not all Persians were villains. She defied the lines that war tried to draw, that rarely welcomed female power, yet they made themselves impossible to ignore, one with ships and fire, the other with marvel and grief. But both with unshakable command, their stories resist erasure because they never relied on flattery or fantasy, just action and its consequences as the generations passed. Her legacy did not vanish. Instead, it returned in strange echoes and familiar names. Another Artemisia would rise in Caria, this time as a builder, not a warrior, yet still carrying the same weight of presence. Her namesake ruled with dignity and left behind the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, a wonder of the ancient world, not just for its grandeur, but for what it symbolized. It was not only a tomb, but a proclamation that memory matters, that women too could leave stone and legacy interwoven. And even if their bloodlines remain uncertain, their connection is spiritual, bound by name and by the defiance of expectation. They ruled in a time. Perhaps most intriguing is how the memory of Artemisia didn't need embellishment to survive. She was not sanctified by myth nor buried by scandal. She lived in the middle. And even now, as her name threads through history, it does so not with grandeur, but with gravity. There is a calm authority. Artemisia. And then there is the modern view, where historians and readers alike continue to wrestle with what she represents, a feminist icon before. Feminism may be a symbol of shrewd leadership in a world built to exclude her. Absolutely. Her legacy continues to fascinate, not because she fit the mold of ancient queens, but because she corrected. Open in military circles, she is still cited in naval histories, often as a rare case of a woman commanding warships in antiquity. In literary and political circles, she appears as a symbol of reason in an age of hubris, and in popular culture, she occasionally resurfaces, sometimes twisted, sometimes glamorized, but always unmistakable. But here, as the truth was not unique to her, but her transformation is particularly telling because the distortions reveal more about those who feared her than about the woman herself, of rage or seduction. And yet the very fact that she still appears on screens and pages proves her staying power, a woman so unforgettable that even distortion cannot erase her entirely. She continues to resurface. She is still discussed, debated, admired, feared. Her name lingers not as a trend, but as a challenge to the neat boxes we place power in, especially when that power doesn't come wearing armor shaped for men. When history meets a woman who defies the expected, it often responds not with curiosity, but with containment. A love-struck suicide, a vengeful schemer, anything but the simple truth. A woman who thought clearly and acted decisively. So stories multiplied, legends replaced logistics, and what remained was an echo of fear, poorly disguised as folklore. Artemisia didn't care about legacy, not in the way we do today. She wasn't crafting a narrative or orchestrating a myth, and Artemisia never did. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't to wait to be invited. She assessed the terrain of war, of politics, of legacy, and moved. She navigated not just ships. She sought outcomes. She did not adorn herself in legend. She wore strategy like armor. She didn't to cry for attention. She claimed it through unflinching choices. Her legacy was not embroidered in poetry. It was embedded in the decisions that bent empires ever so slightly toward survival, but systems once built to hold her back. And yet, she slipped through every net, not through force, but through foresight. She lived, she led, she returned, and was entrusted with the future of an empire. Her greatest legacy wasn't the fleet she sailed or the kings she advised, but the proof that power could look like her, that leadership could sound like her, that control and clarity could reside in the voice of a woman who knew exactly what needed to be done and did it without apology. It was chiseled in the fires of action, cooled in hard decisions, and set not in marble, but in the reluctant admiration of those who lived to tell of her, but present in the records of naval genius and political foresight, in the unease of those trying to explain how she, and footnotes in whispered admiration, in reluctant respect. She did what kings struggled to do. She endured not as myth, but as memory held together, not by marble, but by moments and choices and consequence. The foundation of her story is not romanticism. Its results pulled off what she did without the typical tools of legacy. No statue, no temple, no scrolls written by her own hand. And yet she remains impossible to forget. Command, she belonged to no nation entirely, no ideology comfortably. She existed at the edge of every boundary, and in doing so, redefined them. Her memory has mutated, transformed over time, not into a relic, but into a symbol of what happens when ability refuses to apologize for itself. She wasn't laying the groundwork for remembrance. She was making decisions in the moment, bold, risky, and sometimes brutal. Her compass wasn't history as approval. It was the tangible weight of survival she didn't need a crown of laurels. She needed a steady helm and a crew that trusted her to navigate storms both real and political. And that unpolished motive, that raw edge of action, is exactly what makes her unforgettable. Her legacy wasn't polished into legend by the passing centuries as centuries. Past her story morphed, as great stories always do. She slipped from the realm of record into the domain of myth. She was pulled into the orbit of metaphors and painted anew by storytellers, unable to understand her power without reshaping it to fit more palatable. Taylor's song transformed her into a tragic heroine, undone by love others, twisted her into a shadowy temptress, poisoning her victories with imagined deceit, the real Artemisia. The strategist, the clear-eyed commander, was buried under layers of male anxiety and narrative control. This fate. Modern retellings, haven't always done better films and novels, still flatten her, still reduce her to a vessel. When the tides of history carried her name into the deep, she didn't vanish. She simply changed shape, like the wake behind a ship long after it. Gone from view, she persisted invisible. She commanded without theatrics, spoke when it counted, and when she disappeared from the pages of official accounts, she stayed alive in the margins. The most startling truth is that her legacy wasn't shaped by tragedy, but by triumph. She did not die in battle or weep over betrayal. The world has always struggled with women who do not flinch, and if today her name is not as widely spoken as Cleopatra or Joan of Arc, that may be because she never sought spectacle. But they had ziggurats, step towers, rising toward the heavens from these platforms. Priest astronomers kept careful records on clay tablets, noting when Venus appeared on the horizon, when the moon turned red during an eclipse, or when a star cluster returned after months. Below the horizon their word for these watchers, Amanu, learned ones, both scientists and spiritual guides. Over time, Sumerian stargazing would evolve into something more systematic. Their descendants, the Babylonians, built vast star catalogs, predicted eclipses with eerie accuracy, and gave names to constellations that are still in use today. But it all began with the Sumerians scribbling celestial movements in cuneiform and laying down the earliest astronomical records we've ever found. Got there first. They divided the sky into 12 equal parts each, anchored to a constellation, and laid the foundation for what would become the zodiac signs we still use and misuse today. And for practical purposes, that was more than enough. They saw the universe as a ledger of patterns, a giant machine of repeating cycles, and their astronomers were not just mystics or priests, they were early scientists hunched over tablets, decoding the rhythms of the cosmos in symbols and numbers in the dark. They wrote the sky. Sirius became the cornerstone of their calendar that wasn't just poetic. It was vital. The Nile's floodwaters determined crop cycles, and missing that window could mean famine. Was oriented so the sun would rise directly through its axis during the summer solstice. Other temples lined up with the rising and setting and the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife. This wasn't just burial architecture. It was cosmological engineering. Egyptian priests often served double duty as astronomers before Europeans set foot in the New World. The Maya were building one of the most sophisticated astronomical systems the world had ever seen without metal tools, without wheels, and without telescopes. They mapped the movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars with a precision that still baffles modern scholars of stars, considered sacred. And then there were the pyramids. They understood the solar year with incredible accuracy, about 365.20 days, remarkably close to the modern value. Their calendar systems were so refined that multiple ones ran simultaneously. Itza was built with specific windows and alignments that allowed Mayan priests to track the movements of Venus, and the sun. Temple staircases and shadow effects were timed to equinoxes, like the famous serpent shadow that slithers down El Castillo during the spring and autumn. The 260-day ritual calendar Tzolk'in in the 365-day solar calendar. Perhaps most remarkable is their documentation of a supernova explosion in 1054 CE, visible in daylight, and their wars were timed with the wanderings of Venus. They didn't just read the cosmos. They wove it into the fabric of life. If the stars sent the wrong message, that made astronomy both sacred and political. If the sky changed, so could the dynasty. As early as 2000 BCE, Chinese astronomers were tracking celestial events and documenting them with methodical care. They recorded comets, novae, eclipses, sunspots, and planetary motions. Hob and the long count for historical chronology and governance were tightly interwoven to rule. Egypt was to understand the sky. What is remarkable is that without telescopes, without even lenses, contains a Venus table that tracks the planet as movements over hundreds of years with an error of less than 1 day. They developed an entire system for tracking time-orienting buildings and forecasting natural events, all based on patient observation and relentless precision. So the Egyptians created a 365-day solar calendar divided into 12 months of 30 days plus 5 festival days. It was remarkably close to our modern calendar centuries before Julius Caesar ever got involved itself. Their rulers were seen as cosmic intermediaries, and every major political or religious event was timed to match a celestial counterpart: eclipses, solstices, equinoxes. And Venus cycles weren't just observed, they were used to legitimize power. One of their most striking achievements was their tracking of Venus. Yes, when someone asks your sign, you can thank Babylon. But what really sets the Babylonians apart is their mathematical boldness. They tracked planetary motion, even retrograde paths, and used arithmetic methods to approximate celestial cycles. Perhaps most impressive is how this early science blended seamlessly with mythology to them. The sky was divine yet predictable. The gods moved in patterns, and if you understood those patterns, you could align your crops, your rituals, and your fate. The Sumerians didn't. They just look up in awe. They looked up and began to measure, and in doing so, they started humanity, just a curiosity. It was survival, and at the heart of it all was a single star, Sirius, the brightest light in the night sky. The Egyptians noticed something extraordinary each year. Just before the annual flooding of the Nile, Sirius would reappear on the horizon during dawn. This long relationship with the stars. If the Sumerians lit the first fire of astronomy, the Babylonians poured oil on it and turned it into an inferno known as the Saras cycle, a period of roughly 18 years, after which eclipses repeat. They didn't understand why it worked, but they knew it did. And that was enough for a culture that fused divination with astronomy. Being able to foresee cosmic events gave them enormous power, both spiritual and political, of precision. By the time their empire flourished around 1800 BC, Babylonian astronomers weren't just watching the skies, they were predicting them: eclipses, planetary conjunctions, retrograde motion, all charted, logged, and projected with stunning regularity. They weren't guessing, they were calculating. The Babylonians took the Sumerians' observational legacy and supercharged it with math. They recorded the positions of stars, planets, and the moon on clay tablets, known today as the Anuma Anu Enlil and the Muapin, some of the oldest known astronomical texts in existence. These weren't bedtime stories. They were raw data line after line of celestial movements. When Venus would rise, how long it would shine when a solar eclipse might strike. These tablets were essentially the world's first almanac. The most remarkable part, they could predict lunar eclipses using a pattern. And while the Greeks are often credited with inventing the zodiac, the truth is the Babylonians, not geometric models. Mind you, that would come later with the Greeks, but arithmetic that worked. While the Babylonians were busy predicting eclipses, the ancient Egyptians were syncing their entire civilization to the stars. Quite literally in the Nile Valley astronomy, wasn't this event known as the Heliacal Rising of Vive? But the Egyptians didn't just stop with Sirius. They tracked the sun, moon, and stars from their temples, many of which were aligned with astonishing astronomical precision. The Temple of Karnak, for instance, the Great Pyramid of Giza, constructed around 2560 BCE, was aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points. Its shafts may have been pointed toward specific stars, possibly Orion and Sirius, hinting at a celestial connection between the heavens. They observed the skies not only for ritual timing, but for signs, omens, and the will of the gods. Astronomy theology. The Egyptians didn't look at the sky for entertainment. They looked up and saw a divine clock ticking with purpose, echoing eternity deep in the jungles of Mesoamerica. Long to the Maya, astronomy was not a luxury of the learned elite. It was the framework of society. The Maya noted that Venus disappeared and reappeared in the sky in a repeating cycle of 584 days, and they tied this rhythm into their ritual warfare and calendar systems. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving pre-Columbian manuscripts. They didn't just stop there. The Maya created the long count calendar, capable of tracking dates over spans of thousands of years. And the observatories, they didn't have glass domes, but they had stone genius. The El Caracol Observatory at Chichen. The Maya weren't just watching the skies, they were synchronizing their civilization with them. Their kings ruled by the stars, their temples rose in tune with solstices. In ancient China, astronomy wasn't simply a science, it was a matter of state. The emperor, regarded as the son of heaven, ruled with the mandate of heaven, a cosmic endorsement that could be revoked. Some of these records, like those found in the Shi records of the Grand Historian and the Book of Han, are still referenced by modern scientists today to verify ancient astronomical phenomena. And so, as the stars continue their silent dance high above us, we too can find a quiet rhythm in their steady glow. The ancient watchers long ago looked up with wonder, just as we do now, reminding us that in the vastness of the night sky, there is a peaceful order waiting to cradle us. Let your breath slow, your mind soften, and drift gently on the timeless tides of the cosmos, where mysteries unfold softly and dreams begin to bloom beneath the calm, watchful light of countless stars. Rest now, embraced by the quiet universe, until morning's gentle light returns.